This show is sponsored by the Comics Shop. We hope you enjoy the show.
G'day, welcome to Tuesday, Chinwag episode 19. My name's Leigh Chalker. I'm creator of Battle for Bustle, and in case anyone at home doesn't know how the show goes, based on 6 random, questions, points, randoms, I guess, because it veers off into many tangents like this introduction, but it's who, what, where, when, why, and how. And before we get started, just like to let everyone know on the Comics Network that sponsors these shows and the Comics Shop, you can get a comic book called Sizzle and Doug, which is limited edition. And basically there's been 30-odd Australian independent contributors to the comic book, and jump on the Comics Shop, get that, get some goodies, and let's rock and roll with our guest of the evening, Mr. Nick May. How are you, sir?
Very good, Leigh. Thanks for having me.
That's all right, mate. Pleasure. You're a familiar face around the comics hallways, mate. So, had plenty of interaction with you and stuff, and thought it'd be nice to get you on and, get to know the ins and outs of your working. And
I started as the janitor. So here I am now. It's not bad.
Oh, mate. With a goon shirt on, so yeah, very good. All right, and g'day to everyone watching. So, Nick, I'm going to go straight into the nice existential question, mate. The foundation builder. Who, mate?
Well, I am obviously Nick May, Nicholas Charles May. I think I'm a man who wears many hats. Which is probably a little bit ironic since I can't find a hat to fit on this massive melon of mine. But I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a brother, I'm an uncle, I'm a teacher, I'm a cartoonist, and yeah, I guess there are other things in there as well. Yeah, so yeah.
A man with many talents, and juggling lots of balls with. So it's got to get good. See, that comes in handy with your drawing, doesn't it? Hand-eye coordination. So doing all that David Bowie stuff in Labyrinth off with one hand, and pens and paper in the other. So Nick, look, man, already in that introduction there, with what happened with the hats, because that interests me, because I was always fond of the elastic stretchy caps and stuff. I didn't like those ones that had the bubbles and stuff at the back, mate, like the little click 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 click, and you had to unclick them and stuff. Yeah So that's a nice hat.
It's a nice hat, and I've been assured that it's one size fits all, and it's right at the very extent of its stretchiness, and mate, that's doing nothing.
Well, it's doing something, mate. It's protecting your noggin.
Correct.
Because I don't know if you realise this, but I'm follically challenged, and on my scone, and I've had sunburn, so I take particular on my my head, and it hurts. So I take particular attention to the safety of a comfortable hat and cap, mate. So.
I'm with you, Leigh. A lot of spare follicles on my head, and I've spent over 50 years burning this thing. So yeah. But I do need to find a hat that's going to fit.
Yeah. Fair enough, mate. You'll come across it one day when you least expect it, and it'll probably be somewhere where it's not sunny, and you'll go, "Oh no, what am I going to do with this hat?" So, mate, I guess I've had, for people that don't know about Nick May and are watching on the show tonight, Nick is a great comic book artist and cartoonist that he'll tell you a story in a minute, but I just want to let you at the start of the show show you these things because you'll know anyone that watches regularly as I've gathered, well, I guess just grown in a real appreciation for Australian mini comics as well as comic books, and there's a beauty to those things. But Nick has several of them out at the moment that are available. Roller Cop 2000, number 1. There's number 2. It is the War of the Greybeards, mate. There's Vermoose, 1, 2, 3. But the one I really want to knuckle down into was the one that I liked. I like them all, don't get me wrong. But the one that I want to focus some attention on while we're gas bagging and getting to know Nick tonight is Scribbles from the Drawing Board. And this is what I reckon was an awesome little creation, mate. Just to read you what's on the inside here, it's a brief glimpse into the early, sometimes sequential art of this author, artist, cartoonist. And to give you an idea, we go back with the 1980s and a whole heap of comics and things that Nick did as a kid. So, mate, I'm going to... we're talking shop with little Nick now, back, around this time that you were pumping out these, mate. What is it? Why were you doing this stuff? What attracted you to storytelling to begin with?
So, comics, I think, I can always remember having comics. One of my earliest memories is I had a black and white reprint of a Superman, Aquaman book. And I loved both Superman and Aquaman. This would have been in the early 70s. And sadly, my memory is, because it was the 70s, we were driving to the tip and my older brother Paul and I were allowed to sit on the trailer while Dad was driving us to the tip. And I'd been told that I had to throw the comic out. So I was sitting on the trailer on the way to the tip, getting ready to get rid of this comic, but just having a last read of it. And I couldn't tell you what the story's about. And I sort of have these flashes in my head, these black and white images of Superman and Aquaman. So I know I had that. My dad's dad had a little house that he built with his dad and his brothers in the hills outside of Melbourne. And he would go there on the weekends, and so sometimes we'd go there as well. And he had some comics there, so he had some of the old Terry Toon stuff, so Mighty Mouse and Heckle and Jekyll, and I loved reading those things. I feel like I didn't learn how to read words until, I don't know, until I was 10 or something, but I loved reading through these old comics. And Grandad May also, he was sort of a businessman, a well-to-do man, a well-known man about town in Melbourne, and somebody had drawn a caricature of him that was hanging on one of the posts in his little shack of Eric May doing a bit of a walk, and I was always fascinated by that. So all of that stuff's percolating. Also, when I was very young, I was about 3, I spent a lot of time in hospital with a fractured skull. And the only thing that I remember about that time in hospital was that I was given a hardback Super Goof collection, like an annual. I'm going to say it was probably 1972 Super Goof annual. And I couldn't read, but just looking at those pictures, loved it. And that was all seeping into my mind. The school that I went to was all about art and music, serious art, serious music. So this was a school I went to from kinder through to the end of year 7. And I was never a serious artist. I was never a serious musician. And so I sort of gravitated towards people who like drawing, and possibly a familiar tale with other people. But when I would see what other people were doing, I would sort of copy what they were doing. So I think the first comic in that little collection that I put together was Cobra, which was about a cobra that had sort of a bow in her hair. And if memory serves me correctly, it's because this other guy had a comic called Cobra. And so I wanted to make this comic about a tough female snake and it's probably, I don't know, it's probably a theme that's carried through my work, but who solves everything through violence. So, and I think I included all of the little bits and pieces that I'd done with that. So I guess when I was probably about 11 when I was drawing those things, and it was a lot like what I do now, like the process. Now I have a grid and I just fill in the grid and the story will emerge. But you can see in that I was just hand drawing a box, drawing something, putting in a word balloon, then drawing another panel and so on. And so the panels get wonkier and wonkier and smaller. But long story short, I think that comics were my way of expressing myself. So getting away from the serious art that I was expected to do at this school, and just with a few friends, we would get together and draw stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you had a little community at school where, like, would you make like comic books together, or was it just I drew this last night? What did you draw? That sort of a thing.
So a little bit of both. So Doctor Who was a big thing when I was in primary school.
Which was your favourite Doctor?
Tom Baker. I'm not an idiot.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right.
Yeah. So just. I would love to draw pictures of Doctor Who and Daleks, and they'd all be parachuting or whatever, and then just give them to friends, and they'd give me pictures that they'd drawn and whatever. So we sort of did stuff individually, but also there were a few times that we tried to co-create comics. So there were 3 of us who loved making comics. And when we were learning about human hovel, famous explorers, we decided that we wanted to make a comic of them. And I think we got to about panel 1. We did something else that was called Dr. Flu, which I can't quite remember what it was, but a mad scientist. And I think together, the 3 of us, we drew maybe 3 pages in it. I don't know what's really happened to that. And I also had a comic. I didn't create it, obviously, Captain Australia. And I drew that, and one of my best friends who I did a lot of comic collecting with, he drew little bits in that as well and coloured those in. So, so a little bit of collaboration in primary school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which we'll get to a bit further down the track, but obviously collaborations are something you enjoy, mate, because one of your comics that's available we'll get to is a giant collaboration between quite a few different artists. The book seems to be growing more and more as we go. But we get to with school. So you've got, because this is a cool book, man, like this, I mean, it shows you from day one all the way through to, like where you are now, man. Like, I reckon it's a really good comprehensive thing. When did you decide to leave the schoolmates behind, mate, and go out on your own? Because, like, there's some gritty stuff here, like squirt, you're dead, and this seemed to be a little bit of a continuity comic book that you had going and stuff too. And there's some real early, I can see bits and pieces of you, like back then, mate, to where you are now. So where did you, or are you a hoarder? Look, that's actually a bit of a silly question, isn't it, compared to the size of the bookshelf behind you? Yeah. So, Nick, while you like collecting things, do you have you got all of your artwork and stuff, obviously, from these days? So you still got the originals, or you just got
So,
them tucked on a file somewhere?
Yeah, so I've got a folio that it's got a little manila folder in it that I've put all of the comics that I'd drawn probably from the 80s through to the early 2000s. So it's not substantial, but it's enough of a trip down memory lane. I've also got a lot of pages of planned comics that were sort of going to happen through the 90s and into the 2000s. So I kept some of that, but some of it did make its way into recycling at some stage, sadly. But yeah, I think so. I collected comic books with a friend. We sort of met in grade one. We were at this crazy arty sort of school, and we sort of had more mainstream interests than other people. Grew up. I left that school, went to a more mainstream sort of a Catholic school. Left, unfortunately, sort of fell out of touch with that friend. And it's one of those things, where you've been collecting comics like Daredevil with Frank Miller and Fantastic Four and X-Men with John Byrne and all of these classics, reading them, and then getting to a certain age, and it's like, maybe it's not cool to read comics anymore. And then in 1987, I was doing a year 12 course that was mainly all just media and creation and that sort of stuff, given a free rein to do stuff. And I wanted to do an animation about Batman. And the thing was going to be that Batman was going to fight all of these really dangerous criminals and then over time grow a beard. And then he was going to shave his beard and cut his head off. So he turned out to be more dangerous than anyone else. So I went to the newsagent and I thought, well, I'll buy a Batman comic just to have a little bit of reference. So this was in 1987. And then I found out that the year before that I'd sort of missed out on Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen and all of that sort of stuff. So from 1987 through till, I guess, the early 2000s, I was spending hundreds of dollars a month on this ridiculous addiction of mine. Yeah. But anyway.
Totally hooked. No, look, mate, I don't think there's any one of us that wouldn't have had that period of our life. Like, I can remember going into the comic shop that was run by a little old lady and an old fella. And they were a book exchange cross comic shop, if you know what I mean. So, you just get keen, man. Hey, like the ads, and you're like, oh, that, and you bounce off to that and that and that and that. And then, like, my comic book pile, like, every, I don't know, fortnight I'd go in there, man, ended up being, I'm not kidding you, like 25 comics. And it was like, dread, like having to sneak them in. Lucky I had a job and that's where all my money was going, like comic books as a kid. I mean, well, it is what it is. Do you like floppies or, like obviously you like your trade paperbacks behind you? That's a rather extensive collection because it also veers off screen quite a way, doesn't it?
There are 5 bookshelves full of collections here. So originally it was all just floppies. So every month I had a pull list for a long time with a lot of different people. And so somewhere else in the house, I've got boxes and boxes of comics. But I guess, I don't know, I guess I started being interested in having the collection easily accessible. So I think I started with one shelf in here. And curiously, my memory might be a little bit misty on this, but I think the first trade paperback that I got was like something to do with Malibu Comics crossing over with Marvel. It was like the Wheel of Time or something. And when I've looked at it more recently, I thought, but it started something.
Yeah.
So, and I guess originally, like even as a young kid and going into, I guess, my 30s, it was all about Marvel and DC. And then it was a little bit about Image, and I didn't really look too far beyond that sort of stuff. But then I think maybe All Star Comics in Melbourne, they used to have a little section put aside of Australian stuff, of little black and white mini comics. And there was this guy, I'm going to say his name was Mick Wilson. He made something called Comic Book or something, made a few episodes of that, and something else called Chopper Turd, which was interesting. But it was like, oh, okay, so it's not all Marvel, DC, and Image. There's this black and white stuff, and around about the time that I found Mick Wilson stuff, it was also when Platinum Grit was out, and Cyber Swine, and Greener Pastures, and Pizza Man, and all of those sort of things. So it was like, oh, there's an Australian scene as well. So I sort of went hunting for any Australian stuff that I could find, and I didn't know it until late last year, but I got some really early Ed Kearsley work in a black and white comic called The Clan, which was from the mid 90s or something. So just finding out that there was more out there, and even I guess that led me to think that that black and white comics, even American or British or whatever, had value that maybe I'd been overlooking for a while. So
Well, Viper Syndicate, Ryan Valley, g'day, mate. He's got Mick Wilson Comics and did a crossover comic with him. So there you go. If Ryan's still there and wants to, is that still out in the world, mate? Any copies available for anyone that wants to get onto that? The old Ryan Valley, Mick Wilson. There you go. So you would have come across like that is the Australian comics you were just talking about then. You would have come across at a fairly strong time from talking to different people in Australian comics, because they were punching into big city comic book shops. They were on newsstands, like regular things going on there. With your wanting to search for other comic books and stuff and coming across Australians, were you finding at that period in time, because I'm just speaking from like myself, my collection really wanes off into probably the mid 90s myself. Do you know what I mean? I just wasn't getting the satisfaction out of the series that I was like earlier, but loved the medium, did wonder what was happening. And that's at similar times that there was still some Cyclone Comics were kicking into news agents, and as you mentioned, those other ones before. Did you I suppose, because it was a bright burst, man. What's he got? I've only got my copy of that Chopper Turd and Sunburner crossover. There you go. All right, bit of history for everyone. Because it burnt bright from memory, that scene, for a good couple of years. And did you, because there was a period where you've told me in the past that we'll get into as well, where you just dropped away, like from drawing and that for a period of time. So did it all sort of happen once you fell out of touch, I guess, with finding that inspiration through those black and white comic books at that stage?
Yeah, to a degree. So I'm not sure how it works, and it's probably the same with lots of people, Leigh, but maybe it's biorhythms or circadian rhythms or something that I have been through times in my life where I've been obsessively drawing. And if anyone would come and say, "Oh, come on, Nick, it's time to do some gardening," or my big brother would say, "Come on, Nick, let's go outside and play the footy," and I'd almost be in tears because it's like, "No, I want to do this. This is all I want to do." And then that sort of went away, and we might get into it a little bit later with Rob Lyle and my Renaissance and that sort of stuff. But so I've always drawn, but sometimes, and I think I'm in the middle of it now as well, I get really obsessive, and anything that takes me away from drawing really annoys me. So at that, I had this thing, like I'd finished my uni degree and whatever. I had a teaching degree. And in my mind, because all of my friends are super intelligent people, they work super hard at their jobs. They've got fantastic jobs and whatever. And coming up, when we were growing up, I was like looking at these people, and they're like, "I want to get into business. I want to get into medicine. I want to do all of this." And I'm like, I sort of want to get into comics. And I know that it's time sensitive. So, I had a girlfriend, I had a fiance, and I knew I needed to be serious with my comics, and I needed to be employed in comics by the time I turned 30. Otherwise, I had to abandon that dream as childish and do whatever. And so all of those Australian comics were sort of coming out as I was approaching 30, and it was like, oh yeah, so I don't have to be able to draw the Punisher or whatever. I could do something else, something more Australian. But I mean, I didn't realize at the time that nobody was making any money out of it and whatever. But it was one of those things that when all of those comics were coming out, it was like, oh yeah, this is my inspiration. This is how I can get into the comics industry, the Australian scene. And so I was working. Well, I wasn't working. I was putting together this comic that was called Egg Nation, and it was going to be the biggest thing ever. It was going to be about conspiracy theories and whatever. And when I was putting together that little life story of my comics, and I was reading through the things that I'd written, was like, yep, probably wouldn't stand up to any sort of modern day scrutiny of some of the topics that I was covering. So like the least offensive things were there were Asian characters who were being mistaken for being from another part of Asia, and for me that was hilariously funny, like Japanese people being mistaken for Chinese. And I thought that was the height of sophisticated storytelling at the time. And now when I read it, it's like, it sort of comes across as a tiny bit racist, Nick. Maybe you weren't as groundbreaking as you thought you were then. And, and bloody storylines revolving around the Gladiators, that show that used to be on with beefcakes beating each other up. And so my thing was going to be Egg Nation. And so I probably, I don't know, I drew probably 100, 200 pages that either were in sequence or just standalone pages that I was one day going to just look at and put a story together, and that was going to be my thing.
Sorry, man. I'm just going to read Facebook user just sent on that last comment, said it's heartbreaking that we haven't a sustainable Australian comic industry for artists to make a living. It is, but we've got to keep plugging away. So you never know. Fortune can turn, mate. Every dog has its day, doesn't it? So
correct.
It's positivity.
Yeah.
So when did you come to I'm gonna, did you hadn't made it, you hit 30, and people were like, that's it, like, off
Yeah.
to the 9 to 5 with you, you know,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
by that stage too, you would have had your brother Dan, who's also an artist, a very good artist. That you know, maybe you're running similar parallels, because I think he seemed to stop for a while too. So you know, maybe you're getting two May stories in one here. It's but. Did you, while you were in your downtime and working and raising a family and doing all those things, man, you were obviously still collecting comics? You were still picking up things?
So I was still, I think I was still collecting comics until maybe my third child was born. So around about 2006. And the joke's always been in our house that, you know, if we ever had to leave the house in a hurry, that I would take my comics before I would take the kids. and that's not just my joke. The kids say that as well. It's like, Dad, you take your comics on? Yeah, I would.
You know, Nick, not meaning to interrupt, but funnily enough, I can give you a weird story there that obviously involves me. A couple of, like, this is probably like 5 years ago. It was a Boxing Day night. Heavily intoxicated, went to bed. Aircon in the bedrooms going. I get woken up in the middle of the night by Tam. The aircon has caught fire in the bedroom above me, and smoke was going everywhere. And Tam had just happened to be up, come in like, what's that plastic smell, and gone in. And I was totally out like a light. So Tam's got me out of there. I had no idea what was going on, you know, like ringing fire brigade, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, once I snapped on and I knew the dogs and the animals were all right and Tam was all right, I walked straight back in there, man, to grab all of my artwork and my art pads and pens and that, like still like not having any, but that's what and Tam still laughs to this day. She goes, you dickhead, you know, like you went back into a house that could have gone up to get your artwork. And I was like, man, I don't want to lose that stuff, you know? So I can definitely sympathize. It's a weird thing you go back and grab.
Yeah. Look, Leigh, I think by the time...
What do we got there? Has it been discussed how Nick May got his art style? It's Stephen McLeod here, guys. G'day, mate, and thanks for enjoying the conversation. Thanks, well, we'll get to that in a sec, Stephen. We'll do our best, champion.
Yeah. Look, I was just going to say that I think I was collecting stuff just for the sake of collecting at the end, and you know, had a mortgage, and I was spending about as much on monthly comics as I was spending on the mortgage. So it got to a point where it was like, nah, this has got to finish. And so I think that's when the dream was sort of dead. I was teaching then, high school teacher, media teacher, and I just thought, well, you know, I'm always going to draw, but you know, you got to leave childish things behind and become an adult and be a role model for your kids. And it's like, ew, I was wrong. I was really wrong, because I think I've been a role model to my kids in a different way. So my two daughters are absolutely into art and are brilliant artists. And I've given them, sadly for them, a little bit of my lack of self-confidence. So, but they've, for long-time viewers of Friday Night Drink and Draw, I sometimes get to coerce them into putting in some art, and they can smash it. They're really good. My son's not really interested in art, but sadly for him, another segue somewhere else. Just before I stopped collecting comics as a teenager, as Ronin came out with Frank Miller's Ronin. So I think I got the first two issues of that, and then comics were dead. And then when I got back into collecting comics in the later 80s, I got the collected book of Ronin. And so you know, the study here is downstairs. The rest of our house is upstairs. So you come in the front door, you got to walk past the study and go upstairs. And every time I would walk upstairs, I'd see this collection of Ronin. And then when we started having kids, you know, and you discuss the names and whatever, and I said to my wife, yeah, if it's a boy, can he be Ronin? And she was like, yeah. And sadly for him, about the time he was born, I think that Robert De Niro movie, Ronin, had come out. So whenever anyone said, oh, his name's Ronin, it was either, oh, he's named after Ronan Keating, or, oh, you've named him after the Robert De Niro movie. And it's like, no, I've named him after a Frank Miller comic.
I've named him after this amazing piece of groundbreaking comics literature, man. You know, like, geez. Yeah, that's a cool segue. So, man, with coming into Stephen's question about your art style is it's awesome. It really, you know, appeals to me. It always has. I've told you that before. It's hell unique. Like, I've read a lot of comic books in my day as well, mate. You know what I mean? And I can't find anything that even comes close. If anyone else has got any ideas out there, let us know. But for me, I can't find anything. I guess, what were the biggest influences? What drew you to that style? Was it the fact that, you know, after a big day raising the kids and keeping the house clean and working, that, you know, when you used to, you know, kick back in bed, you used to do some drawing? Because that's a funny old story, and you're right, mate. It's no one quite like Mick. So yeah, mate, where did it evolve? Like, what was there a point where it just naturally, organically took that way, or you made a conscious effort to go, I'm going to have a crack at this style?
So I reckon growing up, a lot of stuff was like copying Cy Barry's Phantom stuff, copying Sergio Aragonés from Mad and that sort of stuff, and just loving that sort of stuff. And then sort of, you know, Jim Lee was the big thing in X-Men and whatever. And I was like, oh, yeah, I probably had a few sketchbooks where I was trying to draw people with gritted teeth. And another aside, a thing for me was that these characters always stood with sort of their legs apart. And I created this character called the Atomic Boomerang. And his thing was going to be that he would sort of stand doing the splits. Like, he was so masculine that he not only were his legs apart, but they were right apart. And then I thought, no, that's probably only something that I think is a thing. So anyway, so I was drawing that sort of stuff. I think John Romita Jr. Got on to Punisher War Journal, and I know that I was drawing a lot of stuff, like copying a lot of his stuff.
Yep.
But somewhere along the way, Leigh, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but I thought I love superheroes, but it's maybe it's not for me. Maybe I want to look elsewhere at stuff. So I started looking at more European stuff. Mm-hmm. So as I said before, I went to this school where art and music was really important, and the only comics that were sanctioned by my dad were either Tintin or Asterix. Yep. And I thought that you could only choose one. So I chose Tintin over Asterix. So that was probably an early thing in the 70s, that sort of style. And then much later, so this century, got into Yves Chaland, who was a French creator who worked in something called the Atomic Style. Who else? Serge Clerc, Just Swart, all of these people with they're not necessarily clear line, but they sort of, it's clear what they're doing. And I think if you look at my work and you look at their work, that there's probably something in there for me. So not drawing superheroes, and that's sort of something that I've tried to work on. And I guess also just since I've been involved with the comics thing and with Friday night drink and draw, trying to get things done in an hour, just paring away unnecessary detail. And I guess I am where I am at the moment, and I would suggest that my style will continue to change and evolve. But yeah, I think a lot of my clear influences at the moment are sort of 90s Franco-Belgian cartoonists.
Yeah, right. Well, certainly adds an interesting flavour, mate, because it certainly is for me very unique. I can't think of anyone in the Australian community that is doing stuff like that, man. What do we got? Quick Nick. I see parallels with Nick May and the amazing Mambo clothing art brand.
So one of my favourite books, Mum gave it to me, I don't know when, 90s or something, is The Art of Mambo.
Yep.
And that was another thing. So not only Reg Mombassa's stuff, but the other artists who worked for Mambo. And it was like, oh, yeah, just trying to get down something that's really iconic in one image. And I guess that really appeals to me. So, yeah, good pickup there, Nick.
Yeah. Hey, quick, mate. He's on fire tonight.
He's
that little fella. Yeah, I'll tell you what, isn't he? What? Just snapping them out. It's bloody unbelievable. Hey, so with with you finding your style and getting your clear influences and things like that, and you had been, I would assume what you're saying is when you had a spare moment, if you had a Sunday afternoon off, you do a little bit of drawing, and like me watching TV. I'm drawing, watching TV, stuff like that. Now you seem to have obviously very strong art genes in, like the May family with your two daughters and Dan. Whereabouts now? Obviously, there's a story where Rob Lyle grew up being Dan's best mate, so he was with you, and this will lead me on to Vamoose and your characters and stuff. There was an interesting a favourite of mine is Neil Blandon, as you know. Now, Neil Blandon and you also have got a little bit of history there. So did you meet Neil? I'll let you tell the story, but while you were in a bit of a flattish spot of your artwork and stuff like that, where did that come from? Or was that right in your pump and prime? What's the story there?
So I reckon I was 21-ish. Oh, no, maybe 22. And, sort of thinking, is this cartooning for anything? And I was getting a bit of encouragement, but, all of my friends, I'm going to be an occupational therapist, I'm going to be a business manager, whatever. And it's like, what am I going to bloody do? And I saw this ad for a cartooning course at the local TAFE. And so I convinced one of my best friends, who is now my sister-in-law, so my wife's sister, I said to her, will you, because I was a chicken and I still am, I said, will you sign up for this course with me? So it's like 3 hours a week on a Wednesday night or whatever. And she was like, yeah, we'll turn up. So we went to Box Hill TAFE, and this is where we met this curly-headed nutbag, Neil Blandon. Just, I'd been at school for too many years, and teachers are a certain type. And then when Neil was my teacher, like he's around about my age, a little bit older, but just tells it how it is. Completely different life experience. Not afraid to say, "No, mate, what you're doing there, yeah, try it this way." So I've actually got some original Blandon artwork in some of my sketchbooks where he'd draw stuff properly for me. So we did this course, and that was where that one comic that you saw, Squirt Squirt, you're dead. That was the thing that I made for that course, and it was really funny. So I made that, and it was like, oh yeah, it's pretty good, whatever. And then I just went back to doing whatever I was doing. My friend who came to the course with me, as soon as her workplace had found out that she'd done this course, they were getting her to draw signage for them and to make massive banners for the office and whatever. And I'm like, I guess that's the way it goes. I guess that's what it is. So that was my first meeting with Neil, and I love Neil. Just so different to anyone that I'd come across before, and he would make his own handouts and whatever, and he'd draw all the margins and hand letter everything in his inimitable style. But then, the course was done. See you later, mate. Then I was working in a school. I did a year of teaching there. I wasn't quite into it. And then I was working there as an audio-visual technician. And there was an ad for an advanced diploma of animation that came up. So I thought, yeah, I'll do that, even though we've got our first child on the way. And so my wife's not really going to be working. So I applied to get into that course. I did get in. So sadly for my wife, who had recently then given birth, she had to go back to work to support us. But I was doing this diploma of animation, and there was a cartooning component to it. And Neil Blandon was the teacher again. And it was like, oh my God, I can't believe how lucky I am. So I was, I'm going to say 31, 32 at the time. A lot of the other people in the course were 18. So, I was a bit of a misfit outsider there. And Neil was like, some of the courses some of the subjects I had to do, including animation subjects, I was crap at. And one of the guys who was teaching had worked on, I think, Phantom Menace or something. And so he was a pretty big name, and the TAFE was using his image to sort of promote the course. And he said to me, mate, you're never going to get a job as an animator. And I was like, yeah, okay, cool. I probably won't. But Neil would always write really positive stuff on all of my work. And I'm a real sucker for affirmation. So as soon as, somebody says something nice to me, I'm like, oh yeah, I want to do. And so Neil was saying, Nick, you've got to submit your stuff to Groovy Gravy and all of that. And I was like, I've got this self-confidence issue, Neil. And he's like, just do it. And of course I never did it. So Groovy Gravy went the way of the dodo and all of that sort of stuff. But anyway, because I am a sucker for affirmation, I think when, I don't know, I was probably feeling nostalgic, and I was going through my old TAFE stuff, and I found this thing that Neil had written. And then I thought, I'm going to track this Neil Blandon down and just see what he's doing. So I can't remember what. I either signed up to Tumblr or something. I don't know what it was. And there was Neil. So I was following Neil, and I was seeing his stuff. And I was like, yeah, Neil is energizing me. So I started drawing seriously again, I guess, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, 7 years ago or something. And that was thanks to Neil, and I was tracking him down and, secretly hoping that he would say, oh, Nick, yeah, mate, I remember you, whatever. And whatever happened. But with Rob Lyle, so Dan is 8 years younger than me. So pretty big age gap growing up. The thing was, I guess, my older brother Paul is really sporty, and he would always be at me, come on, Nick, let's play cricket. Come on, Nick, let's go and play footy. Let's do something. Because he would just thrash me at everything. And it was never any fun. But Dan Dan and I guess we both had a little bit of a temper, but we would have fun. Dan and I would play like Lego, or we'd play with army soldiers, or we'd play cricket together, and we were about the same level of cricket and footy and that sort of stuff. So Dan was always a major part of my life, and two sisters between me and Dan. Tash, who is a brilliant artist as well, and Treen, who is a teacher, and she's also a brilliant artist, but she, like older brother Paul, decided art wasn't for her. So anyway, so Dan goes to high school, meets Rob Lyle. I saw Rob around, and it's like, these guys are. I'm in my 20s. These guys are little tools. I don't want them hanging with me.
Get these young fellas away from me.
Correct. And so, I knew Rob, and Rob was a nice enough guy, but he was a kid, and I was like a man, and I had serious stuff going on in my life. And then
you said that he was a kid, and I was a man.
And then Rob had this band, Mighty Boy, and Dan was in the band, and so my friends, my wife and whatever, we would go and watch them play gigs and whatever, and it was suddenly Rob wasn't, and Dan, they weren't these little kids anymore. They were men. They were out there. They were doing their stuff. They were living their dreams, and suddenly. I realized that I was inferior to them. And it was like, no, these guys are living. They're doing it. They're doing exactly what they want to do. And so, I bought their CDs, and I tried to do artwork for them and all of that sort of stuff. But obviously Rob's an accomplished artist anyway, but not that I knew that really. Then Dan was going through a rough patch, and he decided that he was going to go and live in Thailand. So he had a going away party at his house, and Rob was there. And Rob was like, "Oh, g'day, Nick. Haven't seen you for a while." I'm like, "Yeah, mate, it's been a few years." And Rob said to me, I just wanted to let you know that I used to spend hours looking at your drawing table and at your pictures, and that you've been a huge influence on me, and blah blah blah." And I was just like, What the hell is this guy saying? I can't have influenced him because he's in a band and he's a musician and he's great and all of that sort of stuff. And I was like to my wife, I was like, Trina, Rob just said all these really nice things about me. I don't know how to respond. And Trina's like, yeah, shut up, Nick. Just be try having a conversation. So anyway, so I was too embarrassed to talk to Rob, this successful sort of a guy, and we were going to leave then, and Rob ran out. I'm going to say he sprinted out after me. It's probably not quite how it happened. And he said, "Oh, just by the way, Nick, I've made this comic, and it was Badly Beaten Boy." And I was like, "What? You're a musician and you're a cartoonist?" And he said, "Yeah, and you were a big reason for me getting into it." And so I was like, "Oh my God, don't just stop saying nice things about me." So after I'd finished tracking Neil Blandon down, then I started tracking down Rob, and looking at his work and seeing what he was doing. He was working on Devil's Toilet and that sort of stuff, and mate, I was fishing for compliments. There is no doubt about it. So I'm writing, "G'day, Rob," and my name's Chernobyl, and there's some stupid story about why my name's not Nick May, but and he's like, "Is this Nick May?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Yeah, he knows me. He recognized me and whatever." And then Rob was really instrumental in everything. So I got the Devil's Toilet, and it was like, oh my God, yeah, he's done it. And then Devil's Toilet 2, whatever. And he proposed the getting together for Vamoose. Mate, I've got these self-confidence issues. It's like, yeah, if I just keep saying yeah, he'll forget about it. Apologies to John Byrne, obviously, ripping off your cover. But Rob Rob was like a dog with a bone, and so he kept on, and he's like, "Come on, Nick, let's do it." And so Vamoose came out, and he came over with his son, and he had a box of Vamooses to give me, and he's like, "I'm just going to leave you here now to open that," and I'm like, "No, mate, you've been instrumental in this. You've got to come inside, and you're part of the family. You've done this thing that I dreamed about for years, and you forced me to actually do it." So he was there while I ripped open the box and pulled them out, and my wife's having a look, and the kids were having a look, and Rob's just there with his son. "Can I go home now, mate? Can I go home?" And it's like that. I can't thank Rob enough for that, for the whole Vamoose thing. And then Sizzle started up the comics thing, and Rob was like, "Oh, and if you're free, Nick, why don't you come on?" And so I watched the show, and I loved just listening to you guys talking, especially you and Dave Dye, were just killing it. And just, you knew everything, and you were really confident artists and all of that sort of stuff. And I was like, I just want to listen. I'm a listener anyway, and I just want to listen to these guys. I don't want to be a part of it. And Rob was like, "Yeah, just come on." And I was like, yeah, whatever. And one Friday night, he said, "Oh, look, there's a slot. Can you come on?" And I was at home, and I said, "Oh, no, I'm going out. I'm going out for dinner." So I stayed at home, watched the show, and Rob sent me something, I think, and said, "Just come on to the after show." And I had a chat. I was like, "Oh my God, these people are like, I've got my friends, and we've all grown up together since we were teenagers and whatever, but none of my friends now have any interest in comics, whatever." So I gave them copies of Vamoose, so whatever, and they're like, "Oh yeah, thanks." But it was like, I found my other people as well, and so so here we are, and I get to be on Chinwag, which it's blowing my mind just a little bit. Just so we're
don't let it blow your mind, mate. It's great. It's good. I'm learning heaps about you, because I want to give you a compliment, because I was trying to find in the scribbles from the drawing board here. I've had conversations with you and Rob, and I wanted to let people know that from memory, one of his main influences was one of your characters, Matt Rice. Love your work, Nick. What cartoonist advice would you give to a younger Nick, mate? Let's go with that one, mate. That's a very good question. I like it. What advice would you give yourself?
Stop being scared, mate. Just draw something, do something. Like I think when I initially thought that I wanted to be a cartoonist, and Platinum Grit and all of that stuff was out there at the time, and it was all pretty schmick sort of production stuff, slick covers and all of that sort of stuff. And so in my mind, to get the money, you had to spend the money to be in it. And it's just like, well, the things like those things are fantastic and out of reach, but the things that I think are really important are the black and white mini comics that you can make anywhere. Photocopy them at Officeworks. If you're a little bit dodgy like me, you might stay late at work on an afternoon and print off a few copies of that and hope that the photocopier at work doesn't break down. But just draw something, do something, print it. It doesn't have to be sold. It doesn't have to have distribution. But Leigh, I think it's something that you really have impressed on me and other people as well. Just feeling that artifact in your hand of something that's done. So yeah, you can have hundreds of pages of doodles and noodles and whatever, but if the goal is to make a comic, then make a comic. It doesn't have to be 100 pages. It can be 2 pages. It can be 4 pages. It probably can't be 2 pages. But just Nick, anyone who's like Nick May, just do it. Just put something together. And if you're lucky, somebody will say to you, have you thought about trying this? Why don't you do that? Whatever. So I've said that I'm a sucker for a compliment. When I sent Roller Cop stuff to Dave Dye, and he said, Nick, this is fantastic. It's great. And because I'm me, I'm like, yeah, it's okay, but it's not great. I said, Dave, just give me one criticism, one thing. And I thought, this is how you grow. And he said, well, if I can give you one suggestion, it's your lettering is too small. And I was like, well, look, Dave, there's a reason for that. And straight away, I'm like, okay, I can take a compliment, but if you give me a piece of constructive criticism, watch this guy turn to water. So yeah. So,
well,
yeah,
I love the fact, mate, that, like you've had it now. For me, I find it incredibly motivating when, like I met you maybe 18 months ago and stuff. And we'll come back to that, Scott, and see if he does, man. Just see if you got any artwork laying around or anything, or I might be able to hold up some of these drawings for you, Scott, if you want to have a look. But, mate, your productivity is something that impresses me. Vamoose 1, 2, 3, your characters in that, these are all readily available through the comic shop and Reverie Publications and stuff. Reach out to Nick or Spedsy, get yourself copies. They're well worth it. Great read, actually. I've enjoyed those the last couple of days. But your productivity with like Roller Cop 2000, are these modern creations or are these creations from the past? I'm just going to try while you're talking, mate. If Scott's watching, I'll do my best to give you a bit of a look at some of this artwork, mate. So where did this come from, mate?
So my love of shoddy 80s and 90s adventure sci-fi movies, I was thinking I want to make a comic that is like the ultimate sci-fi action movie from the 80s. And for me, like growing up in the 80s, the year 2000 was the future. So thank you, Dave. So, putting 2000 in it was a no-brainer. So I knew I wanted to do a black and white thing. I knew I wanted to do a police thing. And so I drew this character, and then I met Shaden Dew, and she was right into the roller skates and everything. And I was like, oh, yeah, Shaden, I'm stealing that off you. I'm going to put this guy on roller skates. So I don't know what he was going to be called initially, I guess Cop. And then it became Roller Cop. And it was just one of those things, Leigh, so on my iPad, I've just got this grid of panels, and I would just fill it in. And Roller Cop was one of those things. So every now and again on my Chernobyl Instagram page, I would just I would put pages of that up, and slowly a story started to come together. But whatever. And then there was this festival coming up, and I'm going to call it the wrong thing. It was either home cooked or home baked, whatever it was.
I've been guilty of that too, mate. Exactly that.
And Neil Blandon was going to be there. Nick Cleary was going to be there. Dave Dye was going to be there. And I was like, I've got to have something to show these guys, because I've got Vamoose, but I haven't really done anything else. So I'm going to say it was a Friday night leading up to that festival, and maybe we'll get into it, maybe we won't. But I assumed the position, so I was lying down. This time I was on the couch, so I wasn't in bed. I was lying down on the couch, and I thought, I've got all of these pages of a story, but they don't link up, and they don't necessarily tell the story that I want them to tell. So I've got to draw all of the bits that go in between, and I'd set myself the night that I had to get it done so I could print them and I could give a copy to Neil, to Nick, and to Dave. And so I drew through the night. I don't know how many pages I drew, and that was always just meant to be a rough thing.
Alex is letting me know you've got a very impressive beard, Nick.
Thank you, Alex. That's all that I've got that's impressive. So I drew this. I drew all of these pages, put it together. Part of it, Leigh, I was actually inspired by you as well. And at the very end, I put in an homage to June in there, which I thought, well, nobody else is going to get it, but maybe Leigh will. So I had all of these pages, and I printed them up into this one big thing.
Yeah.
But when I wanted to do them as mini comics, Officeworks wouldn't let me print that many pages, so I had to split it up into 2 books. And then I was printing at home, and our printer at home was too slow and whatever. So I had all of these plans to impress Nick and Dave and Neil, and I ended up not impressing anyone. But subsequently I did print them and sent them out. So Roller Cop is sort of like everything else I do, that I love drawing all the time. But sometimes I have to draw a comic. But I set a time frame in my mind that it just has to get done. It has to get done by tomorrow morning. So whatever I've drawn by the next morning, that's the comic.
Yep.
And people have said to me who have read Roller Cop, doesn't make a lot of sense. And I'm like, yeah, it makes sense in my mind because I can fill in all of those gaps. But that's sort of how I work at the moment, Leigh. So I draw and I draw and I draw, and then I have a flurry where I have to get stuff done, and then my energy's gone, and I'm back to just drawing. And if that's a thing, then it's a thing. And that sort of that was sort of the same thing with that Minty Frisket thing that I drew as well. So I was drawing, just doodling and noodling, because I was a little bit obsessed with Dick Tracy at the time. And then I thought, I've got to have a comic done by tomorrow. So I took a night. It was, I think it's 16 pages or whatever. Not a lot of pencils, just sort of rough layouts on the iPad again, and then I drew them. And so I got this comic done in, I don't know how many hours, but I sort of had it done in a day. And then I was like, I must have more Minty Frisket stories to tell. And it's like, now that part of me has gone until, I guess, Sizzle and Doug came along. But yeah.
Now, a question: is it now? You draw, like, I guess, a bit here and a bit there, do you? And sort of like things come from those lines. Like, is that how you're talking? And you join your grids together, so
I've got this on my iPad in Procreate. I've got some blue line grids drawn. So I can split it into 9 panels, or I can split it into 12 panels. And so this is my iPad, and just imagine I lie down and I'm drawing like that. And sometimes I'm just noodling, I'm just drawing ahead. But then if the TV's on or if there's music on, it's like, oh, gee, it sparks an idea in me. And then suddenly there's a story that's happening. So I might just be drawing ahead, and then suddenly I'm drawing stuff and I'm writing dialogue. And sometimes it's dialogue, but sometimes it's lyrics to 80s pop songs and that sort of stuff. So I guess I've always sort of got, I want to draw a person. So I'll just draw like an oval and then start adding detail. Well, not a lot of detail, but so sometimes the body shapes that come from that can be abstract, but I generally always start with the head and see where that takes me.
Now, you're on your iPad now. you were in your younger days a traditional artist, obviously. What was the transition for anyone that's thinking or mucking around with that? Like, what brought you to that?
Yeah, so I guess I was on a school camp, and the first iPad was being released on the Friday that I was coming home from that school camp as a teacher, not as a student. So I came home from this school camp, not having showered or anything for a week, and Trina sort of met me at the door, and she's like, "Oh, Nick, you stink." And I'm like, "I want to get an iPad. Do you reckon they'd still have them?" And she's like, "Oh, g'day, nice to see you." So I drove off to local JB Hi-Fi and bought an iPad and a little stylus thing, and was just noodling and doodling. But I was still drawing on paper, largely. But I guess, Leigh, one of the things that happened was that I started getting older, and like as a teacher in the classroom, reading parts of a textbook or whatever to the students, and there's text in red, and I'm like, "Oh God, I can't read." And then the glasses came, and then the optometrist would say stuff like, "Oh yeah, you've got the normal degeneration for somebody of your age." And I'm like, "What do you mean of my age? I'm young." "Oh, I forgot, I'm not young anymore." So when I used to, like when Rob Lyle first knew of me, and I had this massive architect's drawing table, adjustable and everything, and I had a light attached to the side that had a magnifying glass on it, and I could look through the magnifying glass and draw really tiny sort of things, and my eyesight was perfect, and I sort of gloated about how fantastic my eyesight was. And then, they say pride comes before the fall, and it did. So my vision just disappeared, but probably, I don't know, one day I'm going to say I was about 47 and I had perfect vision, and then I was 48 and I'm like, I can't see anything anymore. and the iPad accommodates my vision impairment. So I can blow up the page and I can draw that and then shrink it down and move to the next panel or do whatever I need to do. So the transition was a function of no longer being able to see very well, and also the whole paper thing. So yes, I do draw when I'm lying down. When I'm hunched over a table and I'm drawing on a piece of paper, I just can't do it properly. I shake a little bit. My lines aren't great, but I feel when I'm holding my iPad and it's in my hand and it's resting against me, that's not moving, and I don't have to stretch my hand forward very far. I'm sort of drawing like I'm in a little container, and it works for me at the moment. So
yeah. Oh well, you got to find those little things that work for you, mate. Like, and if it's working to produce great work, like, I mean, it's something going right, mate. Don't worry about that. Now, Stephen McLeod did have a question just popped up. If Sis is out there, we'll. Nick, what writing font do you use on Procreate for creating comics? How many layers do you use on average to create a page?
Right. All excellent questions, Steve. So initially, I would look at those free font sites, and once I finally figured out how to download them onto the iPad, I was using them, but there was always that thing in my mind that shouldn't you be paying a license if you're using somebody else's work? So people had made these fonts, and so I got this. I got an app. It was called, like, I don't know, iFont Maker or something like that. And so I made a font out of my own handwriting, and in Vermoose 1, that was the font that was from my handwriting. And then when it got printed, and it's like, yeah, I've got my first comic, but God, that lettering looks terrible, because I hadn't set it up properly. I hadn't worked out the spacing between the letters and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah. So I just go to those 1001 free font sort of sites, and I look for stuff that looks like traditional comic book writing or handwriting, whatever. And so I've got a few, and I will just trial them out to see what works and what doesn't work. I think there's something at the moment. It's called Evil Genius that I might be looking to use for Vamoose 4, but I'm not sure. As for how many layers, whatever, right? So when I draw in black and white, I've got a layer that's called grid, and I lock that layer off, and then I add a layer, and I'll start. If it's something serious, if it's going to be for a comic, then I might do some blue or red lines or whatever. So I've got a layer of that. And then when I start drawing, that should only be on one layer, but generally it's not. No, this wasn't a great font that I made. But buy 200 copies of Vamoose 1, and you can see how bad it was. So I can end up with like 60 or 70 layers going, and not all for the one page. Sometimes it's for multiple pages, but and then Rob said to me, and then I would just not compress, whatever the word is, I would merge everything down, and so it was all just on one layer. And Rob said to me, but what happens if your lettering's wrong or whatever and you want to change it? You should keep your lettering on its own individual layer. So I've sort of when Rob tells me some tricks of the trade in Procreate or whatever, then I start working slightly more properly. But I can have 70 or 80 layers going at a time, I guess.
Wowzers. You know what I love about this whole comic book community that's brewing, man, is the fact that we've got you here this evening. You've got Stephen McLeod asking you questions about what your process is. Neil Blandon's in the background, who was someone that, like inspired you. You got Spedsy in there, who, is also, helped, and got you back into it. Like it's tonight, like it just reinforces for me what I enjoy most about it as well, man. Just how even at Australia, it's a big old wide place, mate. But essentially, everything's close, and helping people to learn from your mistakes, learn from the good stuff. Even getting your own comic book the first day you open that box, man. There's nothing like it, So it's always love that buzz of seeing people, talk about that sort of thing. Because as I said, I remember my first day, man, and there was nothing like it. I don't think I'd smiled that like a Cheshire cat like that for a long time. Yeah. Sort of on that note too, man. And Stephen said, thanks, mate, for taking the time. So good on you. And thank you, Stephen, for being an avid watcher, mate, and commenter on the show. For people that sometimes, because printing, like comic books and that isn't cheap, and not everyone, has the not necessarily ability, but they don't have the resources to to do Kickstarters, and some people aren't as tech savvy, and as others. I mean, I'm terrible at it. I'm don't look at me, man. With I think for me, and what you're saying, Nick, and from everyone else I've spoken to, even Jason Paulos and that, with these mini comics, is you can create and do these things yourself at home, as Nick said, on a printer, or at work if you're lucky enough, with your boss, or at Officeworks. And there's a beauty in these mini comics, and from what I've seen of everyone doing these Chinwags over the last couple of months that's done these, it's inspired me to want to do some, because it shouldn't, I guess there's no reason not to You know what I mean? If you've got a story to tell and stuff like that, you don't have to have it on, this huge glossy paper and, painted up. And, like if you just want to get a story out and just within yourself, even kid, older, anyone, all ages, like mini comics are a great source of, like getting your creation out. And I've heard so many people say that it's a great experience doing it yourself, So, just anyone out, give it a go.
Apologies for the dog barking in the background. But I
worry.
will say just really quickly, Leigh, again, there are some people who, well, there are companies around the joint who obviously do print up professional looking comics. And for everybody who's bought their copy of Sizzle and Doug Across the Multiverse, it's probably for me one of the best looking and feeling comics that I've had my hands on for a while. So the paper stock's beautiful, the cover stock's not too heavy and all of that sort of stuff. But you don't have to do that. Officeworks is relatively cheap, and you can put together, if you're having trouble, if you don't have Procreate or whatever, you can put together a comic in a Word document or whatever and get your pages formatted that way. And I know people like to use InDesign or whatever, but you don't have to. So you can do things really cheaply that you can be equally as proud of as if you printed up 100 copies or 2,000 copies or whatever. Just just do it. Just do it.
Yeah, I 100% agree, mate. And like if you got that story inside of you, get it out, mate. And there's plenty of ways. There's lots of pathways you can get there. None of them are right. There's no right or wrongs, mate. It's just whatever you set your mind on. Mate, with now we got the other thing I just want to show is I got this nice little like Nick May drawing here, and so I like that too. Thank you for that, Nick. That was awesome.
You're welcome.
I guess, mate, as we come to the winding down part of the show, couple of little questions I always like to give everyone, mate. I guess we know how you've done it. We know that you're in an obsessed mode, and I can get that because so am I, man. I got to draw, mate. Like just one of those things. It's fire that burns and you can't put it out. Don't know. I can't explain it any other way. Why do you do it to yourself, mate?
It's like it's a selfish thing. Everybody has a compulsion to do something, whatever it is. I like going out and partying, whatever. I hate going out. I like to go and have a drink. I don't like to have a drink. I'm an introvert, so a lot of talking will tire me out. So a day of teaching will tire me out, and I don't really want any more human contact. Sorry, family. So I'll come home from school and I'll say, "G'day, how was your day?" Okay, that'll do. I'm going to draw now. So it's a way for me to decompress and I'm not necessarily making autobiographical things that are dealing with what a teacher goes through, but it's just like I have a creative impulse, and it needs to come out. So leave me alone. This is my way of decompressing.
Yeah, I can totally get that, mate. I have to veer off here and ask you about the books in the background, because like every time we've been on a drink and draw and stuff, I'm like, man, that is a hell of a collection. And we just had a little gas bag about it before. But what's now You may have many, I'm not sure, but what's the one that I guess, like you turn around to and go, oh, she's still there. You know what I mean? Like that's my pride and joy, that comic there, like
Yep.
what is it?
Okay. So if we're talking mainstream comics, up here I've got my absolute edition of All-Star Superman. So Superman, always one of my favorites, I guess, from my black and white Superman Aquaman comic. And I think that was the best Superman comic ever made. But in the back here, and I'm not going to pull it out because it's in a box set, but I've got Eve's Challand work and his Freddie Lombard comics blow me away. But the last one that he did, and now I can't remember the name. It's like F-51 or something. It's about a plane flight from Brussels to Australia, and all of this stuff happening with Freddie Lombard and his mates. And Challand has got his colours down pat, like he's gone for a more pastel sort of palette. His line work is supreme, and it's just any time that I'm thinking, what do I want to do? What do I want to have a look at? I'll pull out this Freddie Lombard thing, and it's in French, but printed oversized, and just that inspires me with his lines and his colors and his transition from panel to panel and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, so some Freddie Lombard.
Yeah. All right. What's your we were talking. What's your independent one? Because you were talking mainstream and stuff, and the number one. So, like, even Nick, what do you last read? Give us something, man, into the mind of what Nick May is like. Like reading when the iPad is down.
So curiously, today in the mail, a Kickstarter arrived. A thing that I backed, Berserker, that was done by Keanu Reeves and some other people. So that is there and ready for me to read, with approximately 700 other things that I've got lying beside my bed that I need to read. But the last thing, I guess, Sizzle and Doug. So it's a bit rude because I was involved in the pre-order and all of that sort of stuff, and I got it express posted to me. But like, that's the pinnacle. That seeing that comic, that's the last thing that I've had a good read through, and really enjoyed every page, including, like, I remember when I used to read Mad magazine in the early mid 80s, and I remember laughing, and then late 80s it was like, not that funny. Into the 90s, I'm not buying this anymore. But reading Sizzle and Doug, there are a few times that I laughed out loud, and it's just, that's a rare thing. And so I'm not going to recommend anything higher than everybody getting onto the comic shop and getting Sizzle and Doug across the multiverse.
Yeah, and it was a big effort by Sizzle and Carey and Spedsy and the 30 other people to get involved in that, because for, like, just anyone that's listening wants to get into comics and stuff too, like, man, there's logistics that are crazy with projects like that. It's hard enough trying to get your own comic together when you're like working for me and Tam, trying to find the time to fit it in around life and that, let alone, being poor shamed, like sitting there and robbed, like, there's artwork coming in and there's things, and, would have been a manic creation to put together. But, mate, it's, I'm glad to hear that you really enjoyed it, man, because it's for a great cause too. So if anyone out there hasn't got your copy of Sizzle and Doug into the multiverse, it is limited edition from 1 to 100. to my knowledge, there won't be any more. Once it's sold out, there's no more. So, like each person obviously gets their individual number depending on their order. I understand. My understanding is there's no limit to the numbers you can purchase. So all that goes to helping our comics, keep these live shows running. And just for anyone that's new to the community or just finding out about comics, already tonight, I think is a great example of, the power of comic books and creation with Nick May being here, and you can see the little, tail ends off to Neil and Rob and the Moose, and like all of us getting together and stuff and learning from each other and encouraging each other to create comic books, and having fun. That's the main thing, being happy about it, because, mate, it is all about fun. It's all about feeling good about yourself. I mean, we're making comics. We're not eradicating diseases or anything, but in terms of, having a laugh, meeting people, socializing, picking up, hints, like being, not being isolated in your room anymore, like wanting to do this. There are people out there that, are doing the same as you and have been in the same boat. So join up, because you got Tuesday Chinwags tonight, where I love talking to creators, publishers, writers, artists, everyone that's in the community to see where they're from. You got the Oz Comic Show on Wednesday nights, which are, like new products and people that, you can learn about, and varying other topics of conversation. You got your Sizzle and Doug show tomorrow, where you can meet some of the creators of that. Friday night drinking draws, as Nick said, his first foray into meeting people back in our younger, like episodes and stuff, which is just people picking a topic. There's a guest, and people, even if you're not on the show, you can still submit your artwork and stuff like that. You can talk in the after party to people if there's people that, you want to meet. You never know who will turn up, because I can honestly tell you, from me, a 14, 15-year-old kid that was collecting Australian comic books, some of the people that I've met on these shows, I had the opportunity to meet, have blown my mind. Heroes that I never thought, I'd even get close to, other than holding their comic books and stuff. And, I get to meet them and talk to them and have a yarn. And then there's Peter Wilson's show, Sunday Spotlight, which each week has a guest, and they talk about, their creative, how they get into the headset, the mindset of putting their stuff onto the page. So there's plenty of opportunities out there for people to grow the community. Everyone's a friend, everyone's nice. Jump on board. And, mate, Nick, I've really enjoyed the opportunity, mate, tonight to, meet you, and let other people see what, inspires you, makes you tick, mate. Because much like myself, is we're older fellas that, always wanted to draw and stuff, and came into it a little bit late. So, hopefully with some encouragement there, people can jump on board and, do what they, do some artwork, some minis, get printed, visit all the sites and everything, get your creative, juices pumping and get your stuff out there. Mate, where can we get Nick May's stuff, if anyone out there wants to know?
So the Moose stuff you can get either from the comic shop or from Rob at Psycho Janitor. The other stuff that I've done, it's sort of niche. I don't sell it. I'll give it to you. So if I've got copies lying around, contact me on Instagram at Chernobyl or Chernobyl. And thanks, Alex. And if you send me your address and I'm feeling generous, I will send you copies of some of the minis that I've done.
Yeah, I would strongly recommend going and checking out the man's work. That particularly is a great insight into a bloke that yeah, I mean, it's all there on the page to see that, like he's not talking jive, from the 1980s all the way through to now. There's pieces of art there. You can see the dude grow, Look, lastly, don't forget to like and subscribe and press the bell, as Alex would say, on the YouTube channels and stuff, because that helps all the internet algorithms and all that stuff, and makes it easier for people to find and attracts attention to these shows and stuff for the community, so they can all learn about them and feel good on you, Spency.
Cheers,
and come and join the crew if you're someone out there, anywhere at all. It's a welcoming community, and just reach out to anyone.
Can I just interrupt there, Leigh? Just what Leigh is saying, like there are opportunities here, and if you are like Spedsy, like myself, a sucker for a compliment, there is no greater compliment that you can get than joining in on a Friday night drink and draw. Send in your art, and you've got these legendary people who will say nice things about your work. And then there's eyeballs on your stuff. And how can you not feel proud of yourself when you've got people like Leigh, like Dave Dye, like Nick Cleary, like Sizzle, like Rob, saying nice stuff about your work, and then also people that you don't know, you've got no idea who they are. They're seeing your stuff. They're seeing you online. So just send stuff in. Have a look at what the prompts are. I've seen that it's Swamp Thing, so I think I'm going to be away this weekend, this Friday night. But send your stuff in for Friday night drink and draw to get a happy critique of your work and to get your stuff seen.
Well said, mate. Thank you. Awesome. All right. So one other thing I would like to say is people have said to me of late, I'm always enthusiastic and happy. And you know why? It's not just because I'm happy in life and I'm doing lots of drawing. It's because at ComX, you can there's a little shop there. That shop's got, I think it's 100 plus comic books. I could be wrong, but I think I'm right. But you'll have to find out by following it up and going there. You can get Sizzle and Doug. You can get brand new Dave Dye comic, Amazing Tales 6. The Tale of Beowulf, that's just popped out onto the shelves, and that's all available for you. There's a ton of Australian creators that are on there. There's other places in Australia, Owner India, Every Publication, Cyclone Publishing, Gestalt in Western Australia. It is a large community with a great deal of diverse creators, and I would encourage anyone, if you're interested in seeing where Australian comics are at right now, then jump on board and go and pick some up for yourself and check it out, because there's a lot of hard-working people that enjoy doing it. So, look, we'll leave it there, and you guys all get a week off from me now. So thanks for putting up with my big head over the last 3 or 4 shows over this week. It is what it is. It's been a great pleasure hosting the shows and saying g'day and being a guest. It's been great having Nick May here. Hey, always remember, community is unity. So see you next week for Hayden Sparrow.
Cheers.
This show is sponsored by the Comics Shop. Check out comex.cx for all things comics and find out what comics is all about. We hope you enjoyed the show.